What's up, Radiant Youth? We have spent the past few weeks in a series called Potential, and it's all about dating. And it made me think about this question. Do you know someone who throws common sense out the window when it comes to dating?
The cow says boo!
Maybe that person is really careful when it comes to nearly every other area of life. But when it comes to dating, they want to be with someone so bad that they seem to settle for anyone. Or they overlook all the red flags just so they can date.
Can you people not see me?
Like, we all have that one friend who says things like, I know they aren't perfect, I know they've done dumb stuff in the past, but they've changed, they really like me, and in your head, you're like, hasn't every person that has dated them said the same thing? Like, literally the same thing? Sometimes it's easy for us to throw logic out the window because we just want to be with someone. This can be funny and no big deal when friends do this and things work out, but other times it can be sad and people can end up hurt. It's easy to think things like, why would you do that? Why would you settle? Don't you know how this is gonna end? Don't you know how it always ends? In some ways, that's why people talk about regret so much when they talk about dating. It isn't that dating itself is bad. Dating can be a great part of your teen years, but sometimes the emotional ties of a relationship can make it tough to see things clearly. Or sometimes we want to be in a relationship so bad that it can be easy to make choices that we probably wouldn't otherwise. We can end up making choices we regret because of the pressure to date that we feel. And what's interesting is that although we can see it when it's happening to other people, we often don't always see it in ourselves. It's like a mirror and a magnifying glass. Mirrors reflect what we see in them, but a magnifying glass blows things up so that you can see them better. And this is what we do sometimes. We use a magnifying glass with other people, but we refuse to use a mirror with ourselves. Maybe one of your friends dated someone who doesn't have the best reputation, and you thought that he or she was making a bad choice. But then you meet someone who also didn't have a great reputation, but for different reasons. And because you felt like your situation was different, you were confident that you could handle whatever happened, or that you could change them somehow. Maybe one of your friends has clear boundaries about what they would and wouldn't do physically in a relationship. And then they dated someone who pressured them to cross those lines. Not the best idea, right? But then you started dating someone and thought it's not a big deal. Feelings were hovering around a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, and you felt pressure from them, from yourself, to do things that you thought you wouldn't do. See, we all tend to have the same general rules when it comes to dating. Don't date someone who brings you down or pulls you away from your values. But when we actually start catching feelings for someone, those rules tend to become a little more flexible. We say things like, it's fine, it's just the way it is, or I can control this, it won't get out of hand. I can handle the consequences. And these views can bring us to a place where we make less than great decisions. You know, as I was thinking about the topic of dating and mirrors and magnifying glasses, I was reminded about a story of King David. Now, most of us think of David in a pretty positive way. He slayed Goliath, he was a great leader. The Bible even describes him as a man after God's own heart. But even with that kind of clout, he still had his downfalls. There was a time when Israel was at war with one of their biggest enemies, the Ammonites. And during that time, when the nation went to war, it was normal for the king to fight alongside their troops. But this time, David decided to not go and fight with his men. 2 Samuel says it like this. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to the war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. David was essentially like, nah, I'm good, y'all have fun. And that decision had consequences that we're gonna look at later. By choosing to stay home, David was essentially sending this message to his troops. I want you to take care of the hard stuff, but I'm gonna hang back at home and watch Netflix. One afternoon, David is walking around on the rooftop of his palace like kings do, where he could overlook the city that he ruled. And all of a sudden, he notices a beautiful woman bathing on her rooftop.
What?
And I should preface, back in ancient times, people would have bathtubs on their roofs so their rainwater would gather in it and they'd be able to bathe. Now, knowing the context, the story makes a little bit more sense, but the real point I want to focus on is that David should have never been on the rooftop to begin with. The most dangerous place for you to be is any place you should have never been in the first place. So David gets curious and he wants to know more about her. It's an obvious abuse of his authority, but David is the king, and in that culture, kings get what they want. And in this case, he wanted her. The most dangerous person for you to be with is any person you should have never been with in the first place. So he sends out his men to find out about her, and this was their report. She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam and the wife of Uriah the Hittite. The messenger didn't just tell David her name. He made sure that David knew Bathsheba was someone's daughter and someone's wife. In other words, it was, I have an idea about the decision you're gonna make, and this isn't a good one. But David didn't care. His judgment was clouded by his desire and his hormones, and he wasn't thinking clearly about what was right or honoring to other people. It's pretty easy to see that David made a few assumptions, right? He said, I'm an exception to the rule. What I want isn't that bad. I can deal with whatever happens as a result. David abused his power. He has Bathsheba, a married woman, brought to him. He gets intimate with her, and from this encounter, Bathsheba becomes pregnant. At every turn, David seems to think he is an exception to the rules, but he isn't. Far from it. David isn't above right and wrong just because he's the king. There are very real consequences when we make poor decisions. David could have stopped, owned up to his selfishness and his sin, and things wouldn't have gotten worse. But he didn't. His bad behavior continued and things kept getting worse. David decides to call Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, home from the war to try and get Uriah to sleep with her. Then, thinking that if Uriah came home and slept with his wife, he could say that the baby was Uriah's and not his. But David's perfect plan doesn't go so perfect. Uriah doesn't feel like it's right to sleep in his own comfy bed while his friends and soldiers are out fighting the war. So he slept outside the palace. So then David invites Uriah over for dinner, hoping to get him drunk so that he would go home and sleep with his wife. Nope, Uriah still won't go back home to his big comfy bed. So now David is desperate to hide what he's done, and he orders Uriah to go back to the war. But this time, he puts him at the front line where the fighting is most dangerous. Because if David couldn't cover up Bathsheba's pregnancy, then Uriah had to be taken out of the picture completely. And that's what happened. Uriah was killed, and afterward, David made Bathsheba one of his wives. Now, we listen to this story today and wonder, what was David thinking? These are terrible, terrible choices, and you aren't wrong. They really are terrible decisions. But we really need to bring into focus the reality that the value and respect and humanity of Bathsheba is just completely thrown out the window. Somehow we tend to make David the focus of this story, and Bathsheba, the way her life is sent to upheaval and loss and the pain and the heartache, becomes extra. She becomes diminished. And it's been said that history is written by the victors, but its victims write the memoirs. Bathsheba would have penned the memoir in this story. And it is her story and her pain that echoes to us an invaluable lesson. There are probably times with any of us where what we want, what we think we need, completely clouds our need and capacity to value and love other people. Maybe you haven't been nearly as extreme as this story, I hope not, but we're all capable of getting stuck in a storm we created. If we had slowed down, gotten honest with ourselves, and had a bit of perspective, then maybe things wouldn't have gotten bad so fast. But sometimes, when the pressure is on, we lose perspective. We can convince ourselves that we're the exception. We believe that we won't have regrets or get caught. We can turn it around and we can make it right. It won't turn out like everyone else, and we have a relationship that others possibly can't understand. But if we aren't careful, we can wind up making a load of bad decisions, just like David did. And without even realizing it, we don't even think that there's another person paying a very steep price for our selfishness. Over and over again, David was asking, what can I get away with? How can I avoid the consequences? Every decision he made was through that perspective. And because he was the only person speaking into his decisions, he did things that he shouldn't just to get what he wanted. to such a degree that Bathsheba's value, well-being, and feelings were never even considered. When we believe that we're the exception to the rule, or we feel like we can't be okay without a relationship, we can end up justifying bad decisions. We tell ourselves things are okay even when they aren't, and this is a temptation that we can all face. But the truth is, the pressure to be with someone can cause you to settle for anything. We end up settling for situations, people, or relationships that aren't going to be the best for you or the other person, especially when the pressure we are under is brought on by ourselves. We can't lose sight of this. Settling for anything can mean that all the while, fading in the background is a person, someone with an intrinsic and deep value on the other side of our misplaced desire that we may end up hurting. So when it comes to dating, it helps to be honest with yourself and ask the right questions. Questions like, is there any area where you feel pressure to get something or do something that you don't actually need? Is there any area where you find yourself thinking, that may be true for everybody else, but it isn't true for me or us? Is there anything that makes you think you have things under control, even when everyone else is telling you differently? In other words, is there an area where you're settling for something or someone that you know you shouldn't? So you might be wondering, is this how the story ended? No, David recognized that he was wrong, but he didn't do it alone. It took someone else speaking up and David being willing to listen. Sometimes seeing things clearly can take someone being real and honest with us, even when it isn't easy. But it also takes us being willing to listen. So this week, I want to encourage you to do 3 things. 1, find someone to speak into your dating life. This could be a wise friend, it could be your small group leader, probably best to be a trusted adult. But think about the people in your life who you trust, and then identify someone who will be completely honest with you. 2, ask them to help you see areas where you're not honest with yourself or facing the truth in your life. Now, this part isn't easy. It might even be scary. It isn't like you have to share every deepest, darkest secret to start, but you do have to start somewhere. Chances are they'll be able to see things just by knowing you. And 3, actually listen to them. If you find someone you trust and they have all the wisest things to say, that wisdom is wasted if you don't listen. So make a decision to always give this person a chance to say what they see, to always be honest with you. And even when it may be something you may not want to hear, because if you don't want to hear your thoughts on the situation, there's a good chance that you need to. So let me ask you a couple difficult questions. 1, do you have someone to help you gain perspective as it relates to dating? And 2, are you being honest enough with yourself to let someone in who will help you reach the most potential in both your dating life and your life in general? 3rd, are you perhaps manipulating a relationship for personal gain? Have you convinced yourself that it's no big deal? And this question is tough, so hang with me. But much like David, are you abusing your own power? Maybe you really need to let someone in today. Being honest with yourself now will save you a lot of pain later. And I'm not talking like 10 years from now, although that's possible. I'm saying it can save you a lot of regret and baggage just weeks or months from now. The reality is that all of us can end up a million places we didn't want to be by accident, all because we never asked tough questions and made difficult decisions. But to end up where you want to be in dating and relationships in life, to see potential in the person you date, you need to be honest with yourself and let someone be honest with you. Remember, the pressure to be with someone can cause you to settle for anything. And God doesn't want you to settle. He wants you to thrive. Whew. Radiant Youth, I know that this was a lot, but I know it's gonna make everything clear when it comes to dating and relationships. Have a great time in small groups, and this will be your best Wednesday yet.